Jake Martinez stood on the cracked concrete steps of New Haven's administration building, watching the morning sun rise over fields of struggling wheat. The crops looked pitiful, barely reaching his waist when they should have been chest-high by now. 3 years of equipment failures, poor harvests, and dwindling supplies had left the colony hanging by a thread. Behind him, the building's old metal door creaked open. Lisa Park stepped out, her veterinary bag in one hand and a steaming cup of synthetic coffee in the other. Her clothes were stained with mud and something that might have been animal blood. "Morning, Jake," she said, taking a long sip of the bitter liquid. "Lost another cow last night. That makes 12 this month." Jake rubbed his tired eyes. At 42, he felt much older. The stress of keeping 3,000 people alive on this dying world had aged him faster than he cared to admit. "Can we spare the meat?" "Already distributed it to the families with kids," Lisa replied. "Ben Crawford says he might be able to fix the irrigation system in Sector 7, but he needs parts we don't have." They walked together down the dusty main street of New Haven's only town. The buildings were a mix of prefabricated structures, from the original colonial drop and makeshift additions built from salvaged materials. Windows were patched with tape, roofs leaked, and the power grid worked maybe half the time. A group of children ran past, their clothes too small and worn, thin. Jake recognized Amy Sullivan, a bright 12-year-old whose parents worked in the mines. She waved at him with a gap-toothed smile before chasing after her friends toward the school building. "At least the kids still have some energy," Lisa observed. "Kids always do," Jake said. "It's keeping their parents fed that worries me." They reached the community center where Ben Crawford was bent over a piece of machinery that looked like it had seen better decades. His hands were black with grease and sweat dripped from his forehead despite the cool morning air. Spare parts and tools were scattered around him in what seemed like organized chaos. "Any luck with the water pump?" Jake asked. Ben looked up, his face streaked with oil. "This thing is held together with hope and spare wire. I can keep it running for maybe another month, but after that..." He shrugged helplessly. Jake nodded grimly. The water pump failure would mean the end of New Haven. Without irrigation, their crops would die. Without crops, the people would starve or be forced to abandon everything they had built here. "What about the emergency supplies from Earth?" Lisa asked. "Last transmission was 6 months ago," Jake replied. "They said they'd send a relief ship when they could spare one. We're not exactly a priority." That was the truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. New Haven was humanity's most forgotten outpost, barely worth the fuel it would cost to supply them. Other colonies had valuable minerals, strategic locations, or thriving populations. New Haven had failing farms, played-out mines, and people who were one disaster away from giving up entirely. Frank Cooper approached from the direction of the mines, his weathered face grim. At 68, he was one of the colony's oldest residents and had seen it through its brief golden years and long decline. He had been a teacher once, before the schools on Earth became too crowded, and he decided to try frontier life. "Jake, we need to talk," Frank said quietly. They moved away from Ben and Lisa, walking toward the edge of town where the failed solar array stood like a monument to broken dreams. The panels were cracked and dirty, producing maybe 10% of their original power output. "Carl Mitchell found something in the deep tunnels yesterday," Frank said in a low voice. "Sensor readings that don't make sense. Might be a new mineral deposit, might be equipment malfunction. Either way, we need to investigate." Jake felt a tiny spark of hope. A new mineral deposit could change everything for New Haven. It might give them something valuable enough to trade for the supplies they desperately needed. "How deep?" Jake asked. "Deeper than we've gone before. Carl thinks there might be a whole network down there we never knew about." Before Jake could respond, a child's voice cut through the morning air. "Ships! Big ships in the sky! Everyone in..." The settlement looked up. High above, dark shapes moved against the pale blue sky. They were too large and too angular to be human vessels. As they watched, the shapes grew larger, descending toward New Haven. Jake felt his stomach drop. He recognized the design from intelligence briefings years ago. Zelkari warships, sleek and deadly, built for conquest rather than exploration. There were at least a dozen of them, more than enough to obliterate a settlement like New Haven. "Everyone, stay calm," Jake called out, though his own voice shook. "Go to your homes. Keep the children inside." The ships landed in the fields surrounding the town, their engines scorching the struggling crops. Landing ramps lowered, and figures in dark armor emerged. The Zelkari were tall and thin, their movements precise and predatory. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. A figure that was clearly the commander approached Jake. The alien's armor was more elaborate than the others, decorated with symbols that probably indicated rank or achievements. When it spoke, its voice was translated by a device on its chest. "I am Commander Thexval of the Zelkari Empire. This world now belongs to the Empire. You will surrender immediately." Jake looked around at his people. Lisa stood near the medical clinic, her face pale but determined. Ben had emerged from under his machinery, wiping his hands nervously. Frank Cooper was shepherding children toward their homes. Amy Sullivan peeked out from behind her mother, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. These people had worked so hard to build something here, even as everything seemed to fall apart around them. They deserved better than to be conquered by an alien empire that saw them as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. But Jake also knew they had no choice. New Haven had no defenses, no military, no way to resist a force like this. Their communications equipment was too weak to call for help, and even if they could, no one would come in time. "We surrender," Jake said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Please, don't hurt my people. They're just farmers and miners. They've never done anything to harm the Empire." Commander Thexval looked around at the failing settlement with what might have been disgust. "This will serve as a temporary outpost while we establish proper facilities. Your people will be relocated when transport becomes available." Jake nodded, knowing that relocated probably meant something much worse than the word implied. But, for now, his people were alive, and that was all that mattered. As Zelkari soldiers spread through the settlement, Jake caught Frank Cooper's eye. The old man gave him a barely perceptible nod before walking calmly toward his home. There was something in that look that Jake didn't quite understand, but it gave him the smallest flicker of hope in the growing darkness. 2 weeks had passed since the Zelkari took control of New Haven. The alien soldiers had settled into a routine that made Jake's skin crawl. They patrolled the settlement in pairs, their weapons always ready, treating every human like a potential threat despite the colonists' obvious helplessness. Commander Thexval had taken over the administration building as his headquarters. From Jake's old office, he coordinated the systematic cataloging of everything the colony possessed. Every tool, every scrap of metal, every bag of grain was recorded and marked for eventual transport to Zelkari ships. Lisa Park made her morning rounds through the settlement, checking on the livestock that the aliens had allowed them to keep. The Zelkari seemed to understand that dead humans were less useful than living ones, so they permitted basic maintenance of food sources. But everything else was fair game for their inventory. She stopped at the Miller farm, where old Pete Johnson was trying to repair a fence. The Zelkari had damaged it when they landed, and Pete was struggling with tools that looked like they might fall apart at any moment. "Need any help?" Lisa asked, setting down her veterinary bag. Pete looked up from his work, sweat beading on his forehead. "This wire is completely shot. Been trying to splice it together, but it keeps breaking." He glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "Found something interesting in the barn yesterday. Might want to take a look when you have time." Lisa nodded casually, as if he had just asked her to check on a sick animal. "I'll stop by later. How are the chickens?" "Laying better than expected," Pete replied with a slight smile. "Almost like they know we need them more than ever." As Lisa continued her rounds, she noticed things the Zelkari soldiers missed. Ben Crawford was working under the hood of an old transport vehicle, but his movements were too precise, too knowing for someone just trying to keep junk machinery running. When Amy Sullivan ran past with her friends, their game of tag took them in a careful pattern that let them observe every guard post without seeming to pay attention. Carl Mitchell emerged from the mine entrance, his clothes covered in the usual dirt and dust. But when he caught Lisa's eye, he touched his ear briefly, a gesture so quick that anyone watching would think he was just scratching an itch. "How's the mining going?" Lisa asked as she approached. "Deeper than ever," Carl replied. "Finding things down there I never expected to see. The geology is more interesting than our surveys suggested." A Zelkari patrol walked past, their attention focused on a group of colonists working in the fields. Carl waited until they were out of earshot before continuing. "That equipment malfunction I mentioned to Frank? Turns out it wasn't a malfunction at all. The readings are real and they're coming from sections we've never officially mapped." Lisa felt her pulse quicken. "How deep?" "Deep enough that our friends up there don't know about it," Carl said meaningfully. "Frank wants to see you when you finish your rounds." Lisa found Frank Cooper sitting on the porch of the old school building, watching a group of children play in the dusty yard. To any observer, he looked like a tired old man keeping an eye on the kids. But when Lisa approached, she could see the sharp intelligence in his eyes that age and hardship hadn't dimmed. "Walk with me," Frank said quietly, standing up with the careful movements of someone whose bones ached. They strolled toward the edge of town, moving slowly enough to seem like two people with nowhere important to be. Frank pointed out damaged buildings and failed equipment, maintaining a conversation about repairs and resource shortages that would bore any eavesdropping Zelkari. "The children are adapting well," Frank said as they passed a group playing near the broken solar array. "Amy Sullivan has a natural talent for observation, notices things adults miss." As if summoned by her name, Amy appeared at Lisa's side, slightly out of breath from running. "Miss Park, my mom says one of our chickens looks sick," Amy said with the earnest concern of a child who took her responsibilities seriously. "I'll check on it later," Lisa promised. "What kind of sick?" "Dizzy sick, walking in circles. But only when the metal men aren't watching." Lisa and Frank exchanged a quick glance. Amy's mother, Katie Brooks, had always been sharp. If she was sending messages through her daughter, it meant something important. "Amy, honey, why don't you go help your friends with their game?" Frank suggested gently. The girl nodded and ran off, but not before giving Lisa a look that seemed far too knowing for a 12-year-old. They reached the edge of the settlement, where the failed infrastructure gave way to empty fields and rocky hills. In the distance, they could see Zelkari ships sitting like dark beetles on the landscape. "They're getting comfortable," Frank observed. Thexval requested permission to strip mine the entire region. Apparently, New Haven isn't worth the effort of a permanent occupation. "That's good for us, right?" Lisa asked. "Depends on what we're planning to do about it," Frank replied. "The question is whether we're going to keep pretending to be helpless farmers until they ship us off to labor camps, or if we're ready to show them what New Haven really is." Lisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Frank, what are you talking about?" The old man smiled, and for a moment his weathered face looked decades younger. "Did you really think Earth would put a colony this far out without any way to protect itself? Did you think they'd send 3,000 people to the edge of nowhere with nothing but farming equipment and mining tools?" Before Lisa could respond, the ground beneath their feet vibrated slightly. It was barely perceptible, like the distant rumble of machinery deep underground. "The children have been doing excellent work," Frank continued as if nothing had happened. "Their games take them all over the settlement. Amazing how much you can learn just by watching where people go and when they go there." Another vibration, stronger this time. In the distance, Lisa could see Ben Crawford still working on his transport vehicle, but now she noticed that other colonists were gathered around him, ostensibly helping, but actually forming a screen that blocked the view from the nearest Zelkari patrol. "Lisa," Frank said quietly, "how long has it been since you performed real veterinary work?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when did you last treat an actual sick animal instead of maintaining communication equipment disguised as medical supplies?" Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Frank with new eyes, seeing past the facade of a retired teacher to something much more dangerous underneath. "The children call them metal men," Frank continued conversationally. "Interesting choice of words. Almost like someone taught them that organic beings and artificial constructs require different tactical approaches." The vibrations had stopped, but Lisa could swear she felt something different in the air, like the feeling before a thunderstorm when electricity builds in the clouds. "Frank, who are you really?" The old man's smile widened. "The same person I've always been, a teacher. But what I teach depends on what my students need to learn." In the fields beyond the settlement, Lisa could see Amy Sullivan and her friends playing their endless games of tag and hide and seek. But now she realized that their laughter and shouting served another purpose, masking the sound of other activities taking place just out of sight. The Zelkari had captured Earth's weakest colony. But as Lisa was beginning to understand, weakness could be the most dangerous disguise of all. The night air was cool and still as Pete Johnson made his way through the settlement. To any watching Zelkari guard, he looked like an old maintenance worker heading out for another repair job. His toolbox rattled softly as he walked, and his movements seemed slow and deliberate, like someone whose joints complained with every step. But Pete's eyes were sharp, and his path was anything but random. He avoided the patrol routes with practiced ease, staying in shadows and timing his movements to coincide with the guards' routine sweeps. After 3 weeks of observation, every colonist knew exactly where the aliens would be at any given time. Pete reached the old storage building near the edge of town and slipped inside. The interior looked like any other colonial warehouse, filled with broken equipment, spare parts, and supplies that might be useful someday. But Pete moved to a specific section of the floor and pressed a sequence of worn metal plates. The floor hummed quietly and slid aside, revealing a ladder that descended into darkness. Pete climbed down, his movements now fluid and confident, like a man half his age. The chamber below was nothing like the ramshackle buildings above. Clean metal walls surrounded banks of equipment that hummed with quiet efficiency. Status lights blinked in steady patterns, and screens displayed information in languages the Zelkari had never seen. "About time," said a voice from the shadows. Ben Crawford stepped into the light, but he looked nothing like the struggling mechanic who spent his days fixing broken farm equipment. His clothes were clean, his posture straight, and his eyes held the sharp focus of someone accustomed to complex technical work. "All systems are green," Pete reported, his voice now crisp and professional. "Power core has been running at minimal output for 3 years, but it's ready to scale up on command." Ben nodded and turned to a communication panel. "Control, this is Chief Engineer Crawford. Initiate launch sequence authorization." A female voice responded immediately. "Authorization confirmed. All stations report ready. Awaiting final command." Above them, Jake Martinez stood in his darkened office, looking out at the Zelkari guards patrolling his settlement. Commander Thexval had retired to his quarters hours ago, confident that his primitive human captives were safely contained. Jake touched a small device hidden behind his ear. "All units, this is Admiral Martinez. Operation Ghostwind is now active. Remember, these people have families and children too, but they chose to come to our home with weapons. We defend our people." "Copy, Admiral," came Frank Cooper's voice, no longer sounding like an elderly teacher. "Tactical assessment complete. Recommend full deployment." Jake closed his eyes briefly. 3 years of pretending to be a failed colonial administrator. 3 years of watching his people play their roles perfectly, maintaining the illusion of a dying settlement while one of humanity's most advanced research facilities operated beneath their feet. "Execute," Jake said quietly. In the underground chamber, Pete Johnson's fingers flew over a control panel that would have impressed the Zelkari engineers. Systems that had been dormant for years came online in smooth succession. Throughout the settlement, hidden mechanisms began to activate. The ground trembled slightly as massive blast doors opened deep beneath the colony. Lights flickered on in chambers that the aliens had never detected, revealing equipment that represented the cutting edge of human military technology. Lisa Park was no veterinarian. Dr. Lisa Park was one of Earth's leading experts in xenobiology and military intelligence, and she had spent 3 years learning everything there was to know about Zelkari physiology and psychology. Her veterinary supplies contained enough concentrated anesthetic to render every alien soldier unconscious within minutes. Ben Crawford wasn't a struggling mechanic. Chief Engineer Crawford had designed half the systems now coming online beneath New Haven. The broken-down vehicles he maintained were actually sophisticated sensor platforms and communication arrays, hidden in plain sight among the colony's failing infrastructure. Frank Cooper wasn't a retired teacher. Colonel Cooper had spent 40 years training special operations forces, and every child in New Haven had received education in tactics, reconnaissance, and survival that would have impressed military academies on Earth. Carl Mitchell wasn't just a miner. Major Mitchell had been expanding the underground facility for 3 years, creating a network of tunnels and chambers that could house and supply a force 10 times larger than the Zelkari garrison. Even Amy Sullivan wasn't just a curious child. At 12 years old, she had been trained from birth to observe, analyze, and report on everything around her. Her games with the other children had mapped every alien position, every weakness in their security, every pattern in their behavior. The Zelkari had captured what they thought was Earth's weakest colony. In reality, they had walked into one of humanity's most classified military installations. Commander Thexval woke to the sound of his communication system screaming with alarm signals. He rolled from his bunk, reaching for his weapons, but the floor beneath his feet was vibrating with a low, powerful hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He activated his communicator. All units report status. Static answered him. Communications respond immediately. More static. Thexval moved to the window of his commandeered office and looked out at the settlement. What he saw made his blood run cold. The ramshackle buildings were transforming. Sections of walls folded away to reveal weapon emplacements. The broken solar array was rising from the ground, but it wasn't a solar array at all. It was a sensor and targeting system more advanced than anything in the Zelkari fleet. In the fields where his ships had landed, the ground was opening like enormous flowers, revealing launch bays filled with aircraft that seemed to bend light around themselves. Human figures moved between them with military precision, no longer the fumbling colonists he had dismissed as harmless. Jake Martinez appeared on every screen in the alien compound simultaneously. But this wasn't the tired, defeated administrator, Thexval remembered. This man stood straight, his eyes sharp with intelligence and authority, wearing a uniform that marked him as high-ranking military. Commander Thexval, Jake said, his voice calm and professional. I am Admiral Martinez of the Earth Defense Corps. Welcome to Research Station New Haven. Thexval tried again to reach his soldiers, but every communication channel was filled with the same message. For the past 3 years, your empire has been observing what you believe to be a failing human colony, Jake continued. You have been watching our people struggle with broken equipment, failing crops, and desperate conditions. What you have actually been observing is the most successful intelligence operation in human history. Through his window, Thexval could see his soldiers being surrounded by humans in military gear. But these humans moved with the fluid coordination of elite forces, and their equipment looked decades ahead of standard Zelkari technology. Every patrol route you established, every security measure you implemented, every conversation you had, in what you thought was privacy has been recorded and analyzed, Jake said. Your tactics, your technology, your command structure, everything has been studied by our best military minds. The alien commander realized with growing horror that he had not captured a helpless human outpost. He had been captured by it. Commander Thexval pressed himself against the wall of the administration building as weapons fire erupted around the settlement. But the sounds were wrong. Instead of the familiar hum of Zelkari energy weapons, he heard the sharp crack of projectile weapons and the deeper throb of technology he didn't recognize. Outside his window, the transformation of New Haven continued. What had appeared to be a small farming community was revealing itself as a fortress that could have challenged a fleet. Buildings unfolded like mechanical flowers, exposing gun emplacements and sensor arrays. The dusty streets split open to allow massive turrets to rise from hidden positions. His soldiers were trying to fight back, but their weapons seemed to have no effect on the humans now surrounding them. The colonists wore armor that absorbed energy blasts like they were nothing, more than warm sunlight. When the Zelkari tried to retreat to their ships, they found their way blocked by humans who moved with inhuman speed and coordination. A new voice came through the settlement's communication system. Zelkari forces, this is Chief Engineer Crawford. Your weapons and equipment are now under our control. Your ship's engines have been disabled. Surrender immediately and you will not be harmed. Thexval activated his personal scanner and aimed it at the nearest human soldier. The readings made no sense. The armor showed energy signatures that suggested technology far beyond what the Empire possessed. More disturbing was the way the humans moved, their reaction times and coordination suggesting either extensive combat drugs or cybernetic enhancement. Through his communicator, he could hear the panicked reports of his surviving soldiers. "Commander, they're everywhere. How did they multiply so fast?" "My weapon won't fire. Something's jamming the power cells. They knew exactly where we were, like they've been watching us for weeks." Thexval realized that last observation was probably accurate. These humans had been watching, learning, and preparing while his forces grew comfortable and careless. Every routine patrol, every guard rotation, every moment of relaxed vigilance had been noted and planned for. A soft sound behind him made Thexval spin around, his sidearm raised. Amy Sullivan stood in the doorway of his office, but she no longer looked like a 12-year-old human child. Her posture was too controlled, her eyes too alert, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone much older. "Hello, Commander," Amy said in perfect Zelkari, her child's voice forming the alien words with disturbing precision. "My name is Amy, but my friends call me Operative Sullivan. I've been looking forward to meeting you properly." Thexval kept his weapon trained on the small figure, but something told him it wouldn't matter. "You're just a child." "I'm 12 years old," Amy agreed cheerfully. "I've been studying your language, your culture, and your military tactics since I was 7. Did you know that young Zelkari warriors aren't considered adults until they complete their 3rd combat mission? I've been watching your soldiers for 3 weeks, and most of them behave like children on their first assignment." Before Thexval could respond, more figures appeared in the doorway. Jake Martinez entered, now wearing the uniform of an Earth Defense Corps admiral. Behind him came Lisa Park, but her veterinary clothes had been replaced by the clean lines of a military intelligence officer's uniform. "Commander," Jake said politely, "I believe you've met Dr. Park, our xenobiology specialist. And Amy here has been our primary observer for this operation. Remarkable child, really. She notices things adults miss." "What do you want?" Thexval demanded, though he lowered his weapon. It was clear that if these humans wanted him dead, he would be dead already. "Information," Dr. Park replied. "Your empire has been expanding aggressively through this sector, absorbing or destroying every civilization you encounter. We want to understand your capabilities, your intentions, and your weaknesses." Through the window, Thexval could see that the battle was over. His soldiers were being disarmed and secured by humans who handled them with professional efficiency. None of the Zelkari appeared to be seriously injured, but they were clearly prisoners now. "The Empire will send a fleet to investigate when we fail to report," Thexval said. "No, they won't," Amy said with the matter-of-fact tone that only children could manage. "We've been monitoring your communications for 3 years. The Empire has written off this expedition as a minor resource-gathering mission. If you disappear, they'll assume you encountered technical difficulties or found nothing worth reporting." Jake activated a wall display that showed a tactical overview of the local star system. Red dots indicated Zelkari positions throughout the region, but as they watched, the dots began changing color to blue. "While you were establishing your garrison here, our agents were activating similar operations on 17 other worlds in this sector," Jake explained. "What your empire thought were easy conquests of primitive human colonies were actually coordinated intelligence operations." The display zoomed out to show a larger section of space. Dozens of systems showed a mixture of red and blue indicators, but the blue was spreading steadily. "Your expansion into human space has been remarkably predictable," Dr. Park added. "Your forces always target the same type of settlements, use the same tactical approaches, and follow the same operational procedures. Once we understood your patterns, it was simple to prepare appropriate responses." Thexval stared at the display in growing horror. The Zelkari Empire's expansion into this region wasn't the conquest he had believed it to be. It was a systematic deception, with human forces allowing themselves to appear weak while gathering intelligence and preparing counterattacks. How long? He asked. How long what? Amy asked innocently. How long have you been planning this? Jake and Dr. Park exchanged glances. The New Haven project has been active for 8 years, Jake said. But Earth has been aware of your empire's expansion patterns for much longer than that. We've been preparing for contact with your species since before you knew humans existed. New alarms sounded through the settlement, but this one had a different tone. Dr. Park checked a device on her wrist and smiled. Excellent. The cavalry has arrived. Through the window, Thexval watched as the sky filled with new ships, but these were nothing like the vessels his people used. The human ships seemed to flow through the air like living things, their hulls reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Experimental cloaking technology, Jake explained, noting Thexval's confusion. Your sensors can't detect them when they don't want to be seen. They've been observing your fleet since you entered this system. The largest of the human ships settled into a landing position near the settlement. It was massive, easily twice the size of Thexval's flagship, but it moved with impossible grace and silence. That's the Earth Defense Ship Liberty, Dr. Park said proudly. Admiral Brooks is an old friend. She'll be taking charge of the prisoners and the intelligence we've gathered. Amy clapped her hands together with childish delight. Oh good, Katie's mom is here. She promised to show me the new fighter designs when she got back from her patrol mission. Thexval realized that Katie Brooks, the settlement's pilot, who had always seemed to struggle with the colony's failing aircraft, was actually the daughter of what appeared to be one of Earth's senior military commanders. Every person in this settlement is military? He asked. Or related to military personnel, Jake confirmed. New Haven is a family posting. We wanted people who could maintain their cover roles for years at a time while contributing to the research mission. Nothing sells the illusion of a desperate, farming community like real children playing in the streets. Through his communicator, Thexval could hear his soldiers being processed by the human forces. They were being treated well, even politely, but there was no question that they were completely under human control. What happens now? He asked. Amy looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. Now you get to make a choice, Commander. You can remain here as our guest while we learn more about your people, or you can carry a message back to your empire. What message? Jake's expression grew serious. That humanity is not as weak as you assumed, and that conquest is much more expensive when your enemy has been preparing for you. 3 days after the revelation, Commander Thexval found himself in a position he had never imagined possible. He sat in what had once been New Haven's community center, now clearly revealed as a sophisticated briefing room. Around him, his surviving officers listened in stunned silence as Dr. Park explained the true scope of humanity's deception. Your invasion force consisted of 237 soldiers across 12 vessels, Dr. Park said, consulting a display that showed detailed information about every Zelkari under Thexval's command. We have complete biological and psychological profiles for each individual, based on 3 weeks of observation and analysis. She gestured, and the display changed to show technical specifications for Zelkari weapons and equipment. Your energy, weapons operate on frequency patterns that our defensive systems can easily counter. Your armor is effective against conventional projectile weapons, but vulnerable to the sonic disruption techniques we developed specifically for your species. Thexval's second-in-command, Sub-Commander Krell, leaned forward. You've been studying us for years. Decades, Dr. Park corrected. The Zelkari Empire's expansion has been remarkably consistent. Same tactics, same equipment, same operational procedures across dozens of worlds. Once we established the patterns, preparation became straightforward. Admiral Martinez entered the briefing room, followed by Amy Sullivan and her mother. Thexval was surprised to see that Katie Brooks wore the uniform of an Earth Defense Corps squadron leader. Her rank insignia, indicating she commanded significant forces. Commander, Admiral Martinez said politely, I hope Dr. Park's presentation has been educational, illuminating, Thexval replied carefully, though I suspect the real lesson is yet to come. Amy bounced slightly in her seat, her childish enthusiasm at odds with the serious military discussion. "Can we show him the big display now? The one with all the pretty lights?" Katie Brooks smiled at her daughter. "Operational security, sweetheart. Remember what we discussed about classified information?" "But he's going to see it anyway when he leaves," Amy pointed out with irrefutable 12-year-old logic. Admiral Martinez chuckled. "She has a point." He activated a wall display that showed a three-dimensional map of the local galactic region. "Commander, this represents approximately 50 light-years of space surrounding Earth's outer colonies." The display zoomed in to show individual star systems, each marked with symbols indicating military strength, strategic value, and current status. Thexaval noted with growing unease that most systems showed significantly different information than Zelkari intelligence had suggested. "The red indicators show systems where your forces have established control," Admiral Martinez explained. "The blue indicators show systems with active Earth Defense Corps operations. Yellow indicates contested space, and green shows systems where we've established diplomatic relations with local species." There was far more blue than red on the display. "Impossible," Subcommander Krell said. "Our intelligence networks would have detected major human military installations." "Would they?" Dr. Park asked mildly. "How would your intelligence detect military installations that look exactly like failing civilian colonies?" She manipulated the display to show detailed information about several systems. "New Harmony appears to be a mining colony with equipment failures and low productivity. Actually, it's our primary research facility for developing counter-Zelkari technologies. New Prosperity looks like a struggling farming community. Actually, it's a training center where we prepare agents for deep cover operations in Zelkari space." System after system revealed the same pattern. What Zelkari intelligence had identified as weak human settlements were actually sophisticated military installations, research facilities, and training centers. "Port Adelaide seems to be having trouble with their fusion reactor," Katie Brooks added. "What they're actually having trouble with is deciding which of 6 different experimental weapon systems to deploy against your next expansion wave." Amy raised her hand like a student in class. "Don't forget New Dublin. They're pretending their hydroponic farms are failing, but they're actually growing medicines that can help both human and Zelkari people. Mom says that's called building. Bridges through science." Thexval felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "How many systems?" "How many what?" Admiral Martinez asked. "How many of our target systems are actually human military installations?" The display zoomed out to show a broader view. Points of light indicated hundreds of systems across a vast region of space. Most were marked in blue. "All of them," Amy said cheerfully. "Well, almost all. Daddy says some really are just regular colonies with regular families. But most of the ones that look weak and easy to conquer are actually secret bases." Dr. Park activated another display showing Zelkari fleet movements over the past several years. "Your empire's expansion follows predictable patterns. You target systems that appear vulnerable, avoid systems that appear strong, and consolidate control before moving to the next region. Once we understood these patterns, we could position our installations exactly where your forces would go next." "The bait," Thexaval said quietly. "The strategy," Admiral Martinez corrected. "We're not trying to destroy your empire, Commander. We're trying to understand it, learn from it, and if possible, coexist with it. But we won't be conquered, and we won't allow our people to be enslaved or relocated to serve your expansion." Katie Brooks activated a communication console. "Commander, you have a choice to make. We can arrange for your return to Zelkari space, carrying information about humanity's true capabilities, or you can remain here as our guest while we continue our research." "What information?" Thexval asked. "That would depend on what you think your empire needs to know," Dr. Park replied. "Do they need to know that humanity has been preparing for contact with them for decades? Do they need to know that most of their easy conquests in this region have been elaborate intelligence operations? Do they need to know that human technology is significantly more advanced than they assumed?" Amy stood up and walked over to Thexval with the fearless curiosity of a child. "My mom says your people have families too, kids like me but with different skin and different eyes. Do you have kids, Commander? The question caught Thexval off guard. I have 2 offspring in their adolescent phase. What are their names? Vextal and Morval. Amy nodded seriously. Those are pretty names. Do they know you're far away fighting humans? They know I serve the Empire's expansion, but do they know that means fighting people who have kids just like them? Thexval looked around the room at the human officers watching this exchange. These people had spent years preparing to fight his species, but they were treating him and his soldiers with respect and care. No one had been harmed despite being completely outmatched and captured. What message do you want me to carry? He asked finally. Admiral Martinez smiled. That humanity prefers cooperation to conflict, but we're prepared for either. That your Empire's expansion into human space will be much more expensive than you expected, and that we know more about your capabilities than you know about ours. Dr. Park added, also that we're interested in establishing diplomatic relations. We've learned a great deal about Zelkari biology and psychology. We might be able to help with some of the resource shortages that drive your expansion. Why? Sub-Commander Krell asked. Why offer cooperation after capturing us? Amy answered before any of the adults could speak. Because fighting is scary, and people get hurt. And because you have kids too, and kids are the same everywhere, even when they look different. Katie Brooks hugged her daughter proudly. And because 12-year-old girls sometimes understand diplomacy better than experienced military commanders. 2 days later, Thexval stood on the bridge of his partially repaired flagship, preparing to leave the system that had changed everything. He thought he knew about humanity. His ship had been refueled, supplied, and equipped with a communication system that would allow him to contact Earth Defense Corps vessels if needed. Through the viewport, he could see New Haven below. The settlement had returned to its facade of struggling farms and failing infrastructure, but now he knew what lay beneath the surface. Amy Sullivan appeared on his communication screen, waving cheerfully from what looked like a child's bedroom, but was probably another disguised military facility. Have a safe trip, Commander, she said in perfect Zelkari. Remember to tell Vextal and Morval that their daddy met a human girl, who hopes they can be friends someday. As his ship departed, Thexval carried with him the knowledge that the galaxy was far more complex than the Zelkari Empire had assumed. Humanity wasn't weak, wasn't unprepared, and wasn't going to be easily conquered. But they might possibly be willing to be friends. The message he would carry back to the Empire would change everything. The question was whether his people would be wise enough to listen.